morning, good afternoon, good evening. Virtue, once lost, is near impossible to regain. Zanu PF leaders have lost their humanity, and they are beyond the pale. And in this interview, Dr. Simba Makoni was at one point Minister of Finance in the Zanu PF government led by the late dictator Robert Gabriel Mugabe. Is explaining how Zanu PF leaders have lost their humanity. And more significantly, that Zanu PF is incapable of reforming themselves. And I agree with him 100%. Let's just listen to what he has to say.
We have lost our humanity. There's lots of reference to Ubuntu, very farcical, superficial, not coming from the heart.
That loss of humanity, Simba, manifests in the way we have this high disregard for life.
Indeed.
The toxic language and the violence. Talk to me about that.
Again, it's something that we have had for a long time. There was violence during the struggle on both sides. I hear young people who are setting up the Museum of Liberation. I hope that it will be capturing the truth. Some of us will say it was justified because we were at war. Whether it was violence taking place in the protected villages or Selous scouts torching whole communities or comrades beating people up at Epungwe. We can explain it differently, but that doesn't change its nature. Violence has been the anchor of our hold on power.
And again, Simba, correct me if I'm wrong, that modeling has percolated to the street level, to Mbare, to Makokoba. That's how we resolve our problems.
Exactly. Unfortunately. You know, it's sad. You may want to recall this. I think it was in 1988 or just before 1990. Robert Mugabe was campaigning in Chitungizo. And he said, we have degrees in violence.
I remember that.
And in 2008, in the runoff, Robert Mugabe says, how can what I acquired by the gun be taken away by a pen? So this is deeply entrenched in our personality.
How do we undo it? Is it possible, Simba, to undo that? The toxic language, the violence. I know you said work, if work needs to be done, it's got to be done. We've got to start somewhere else.
Yes, Trevor, it can be done. But more importantly, it should be done. How do we do it?
Remember what bleach will do. It'll kill the mold, sure, but it feeds the fungus. And when you apply bleach to...
I don't have a recipe, like baking a cake, which says add 2 spoons of sugar and flour. But what I know is we have to do it if we care about the future of our country and its people. Those of us who see that the way we are is wrong. If we haven't started, we must start working. If we have started, we should work harder. I don't think we can create classes where we teach people how to be humane and human, where we teach people to live Ubuntu. I don't think we can do that. But we can demonstrate it by the way we live our lives.
So to go to your point that work needs to be done, should it not start with visionary, inspirational leadership that evokes the sense of pride in who we are? You know, that kind of...
It would help if we had such leadership. Unfortunately, at the moment, we don't have it. So it's going to have to start with an individual. And I want to see a process that I call the concentric circles of a ripple. You throw a pebble on the water and it will ripple. It ripple until the whole pond has felt the ripples. That's
I have to agree with him there. But I think it is important to emphasize here that we did have the opportunity to bring about the democratic changes that Dr. Makoni is talking about here. We did. The people of Zimbabwe, by the late 1990s, realized that Zanu PF was a party of thugs, and that the regime would never reform itself out of office. And as he emphasized there, Robert Mugabe believed that he had degrees in violence. So if he doesn't get what he wants, he will resort to violence. And this has been our biggest problem, that the nation has been coerced to do whatever Zanu PF wanted to do. We can go back to 1980 itself, when the nation was preparing for its first elections to launch independence in 1980. Although Mugabe and his friends had agreed that they were going to withdraw their freedom fighters from the field so that the elections campaigns could take place with no coercion, when they got home, they decided that many of their freedom fighters would be left in the field. And their instruction was to tell the people that if Zanu PF does not win, the Bush war would continue. Naturally, of course, people voted to end the Bush war. But they were wrong, of course, because that did not end the Bush war. As much as the country became independent, 3 years later, the nation was up to its eyeballs in another war, the so-called Gukurahundi massacre. The primary purpose of that massacre was to coerce Dr. Joshua Nkomo and his ZAPU colleagues to give up being an independent party, coerce them to join the Zanu PF, which they ultimately did in 1987, after over 20,000 innocent civilians had been murdered. And they signed the Unit Accord, which paved the way for Mugabe to impose the de facto one-party state, which has ruled the country to this day. Each time Zanu PF felt their hold on power threatened, they reached for the gun. And this is why in 2008, when the nation held what can only be described as the nearest to free, fair, and credible elections, and Zanu PF was set to lose those elections. Mnangagwa and Chiwenga, the two men who now occupy the offices of president and vice president, respectively, launched Operation Mafotera Papi, which was designed to punish the people of Zimbabwe for having rejected the Zanu PF in the March vote. Here is Dr. Ibo Mandasa talking about the events of 2008.
I also know that Mugabe conceded defeat on 2008. He phoned Mbeki and Obasanjo to concede defeat. I hope that Thabo Mbeki and Obasanjo will one day make that public. But one of them, I won't say which one, told me that Mugabe phoned them that Saturday night and said, look, I lost the election and I concede defeat. And I know that Mugabe stuck to his guns. I was prepared to go. His wife was since bags packed to go somewhere on the following day when Mnangagwa and Chiwenga approached him and said, you stay where you are. And then they contrived the runoff, sadly with the help of South Africa. And runoff took place, very violent. 360 people were killed. The South African, I came here as part of a delegation to Cape Town to see members of the ANC. I don't want to mention names, they're my friends. I saw them, and through them, a cabinet committee subcommittee of South African cabinet was set up on the Zimbabwe issue. It was on the basis of that cabinet committee that South Africa did not recognize the runoff. And indeed, it was the basis of that committee that Thabo sent the generals to South Africa, to Zimbabwe. I met them, and I was one of the few to have read the report, because I was flying to Joburg in the company of General Romano, who was a friend. He passed away, no? That's why, yeah. And I also took people who had lost their hands in the violence to the South African embassy in Harare. And Romano broke down in tears. How can a liberation movement treat these people like that? He was a broken man. So there's no doubt at all.
I think that point should be restated. Romano broke down in tears, asking how can a liberation movement treat its people like that? As a people, we cannot run away from the fact that these same individuals who launched Operation Mafotera Papi, whose primary purpose was to punish the people of Zimbabwe for having dared to reject Zanu PF, for exercising their fundamental right to have a meaningful say in the governance of the country. This was the first time the people of Zimbabwe had done it. And for that, they were punished. Over 500 people, according to some people, were killed in that runoff. And yet, these same two thugs who spearheaded Operation Mapotera Papi have gone on to become president and vice president. Where do we expect them to take the nation? Except deeper and deeper into this hell on earth that Zanu PF has dragged us into. And that is exactly what they've done. Mugabe may have thanked them that they've helped him to stay in power a bit longer. But it wasn't long, because 2017, the same thugs were behind the military coup that ousted Mugabe, so that they took over power. It is foolish to even think that Zanu PF can reform themselves out of office. So it brings us back to what happened during the GNU. Credit where credit is due. As Dr. Mandaza correctly admitted there, South Africa and SADC refused to give Zanu PF political legitimacy after the 2008 elections. And that is what forced Mugabe and Zanu PF to go into the GNU. The primary purpose of the GNU was to implement the democratic reforms to make sure that the blatant cheating and the wanton violence of 2008 would never be repeated. What happened? None of those things happened. Not even one token reform was implemented in the 5 years of the GNU. Why? Robert Mugabe bribed Morgan Tsvangirai and his MDC friends to forget about the reforms. They were bribed with the E-Class Mercedes-Benz limousines for the deputy ministers, the two deputy prime ministers, and Morgan Tsvangirai himself. They were also given the very generous salaries. During the GNU, when civil servants were paid $100 a month, Mugabe paid his deputy ministers and ministers $1,000 for attending the weekly cabinet meetings, tax-free. That is what we are talking about. While they were sitting on the gravy train, they forgot about reforms. They did not want to rock the boat. Some of the Zanu PF cronies were asked, why are MDC not implementing the reforms? And they readily admitted that must be an MDC aziza kuchikanyerere. They are comfortable on the gravy train. They will never rock the boat. And that's exactly what happened. They failed to implement even one token reform. This is where we are. Zanu PF cannot reform itself out of office. The opposition were elected for the express purpose of implementing the democratic reforms and ending the Zanu PF dictatorship, ended up being corrupted and they forgot about the reforms. Where to next? I believe the people of Zimbabwe have to bite the bullet and accept that the MDC, CCC leaders sold out. And we need opposition leaders who will implement the reforms. Just because MDC leaders sold out on reforms does not mean we don't need the reforms anymore. Nor does it mean no one else can implement the reforms. Our biggest problem is that it has taken 25 years with MDC, CCC having failed to implement even one token reform. And yet some people still do not see it for what it is. One of the problems that we are having here is Chamisa conning his Chamisa Chete Chete brigade to keep on participating in flawed elections to give Zanu PF legitimacy. How do you expect change when you are the one who is giving the dictatorship legitimacy, who is perpetuating it? But it's all because those Chamisa Chete Chete brigade members are so naive, so gullible. They've been conned to believe that we don't need the reforms anymore because we can win rigged elections. After 45 years in counting of rigged elections, it beggars belief that anyone will still believe that is the solution. And yet, that is exactly what is happening. The Chamisa Chete Chete brigade are refusing to accept that Chamisa lied to them and conned them to participate in 2023. What is so worrying about that is that they are open, therefore, to be conned yet again come 2028. We are our own worst enemy. There can be no denying of that fact. We have a problem here. We have the regime, Zanu PF, that has lost its humanity. It has since corrupted the opposition because we, the people, were not smart enough to elect quality opposition. And now we are stuck with the ruling party that is corrupt to the core, and the opposition that is equally corrupt to the core. And we still believe that the opposition can bring about the change we want. That is impossible. Virtue, once lost, it is near impossible to regain. And Zanu PF thugs have lost their humanity. The opposition, after 25 years, without even one token reform, implemented, they too have lost their humanity. It is up to us, the people, to accept that political reality and start looking for quality leaders. Think about it. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.